Welcome back. I'm Neil Chase, author of Iron Dogs, writer-director of Spin the Wheel and Contamination. And today I want to talk about two new movies that can tell us a whole lot about where the industry is at right now. One is Netflix War Machine, a sci-fi action thriller starring Alan Ritchson that critics described as loud, dumb, straightforward fun, and quickly climbed to the top of Netflix movie chart worldwide. The other is Maggie Gyllenhaal's The Bride, a theatrical release with a huge cast, a comparable budget, a famous title, and a lot of ambition. That opened badly at the box office and got a very mixed response from both critics and audiences. Now, this isn't a dunk session. I'm not here to mock anyone's film. Making movies is hard. Original movies are hard. Swinging for the fences is hard. But when two big projects land so differently, this close together, that's something worth talking about. Because I think the lesson here is bigger than one is good, one is bad. I think the real lesson is this. If you want audiences to care, you need to tell a strong, character-driven story that understands what the audience came for, and then exceeds those expectations in a satisfying way. Not by lecturing them, not by trying to outsmart them, not by subverting them just to prove you can, and certainly not by catering to an audience that might not even exist in the first place. So today, let's break this down from a storytelling perspective first, and then we'll look at other factors around it. Budget, genre, tone, marketing, reviews, word of mouth, and especially audience expectations. But first, hit like, subscribe, and stick around to the end if you want help with your own script, because this is exactly the kind of thing I work through with writers in coaching and coverage. All right, grab your popcorn, let's get started. Let's start with the obvious. War Machine is a Netflix sci-fi action thriller about elite Army Ranger candidates whose final training exercise turns into a survival battle against a robotic alien killing threat. It stars Alan Ritchson and has been framed and sold pretty clearly. Big action, survival pressure, military guys in trouble, monsters, and momentum. With a reported budget of $80 million, it launched on Netflix on March 6th and quickly rose to #1 on Netflix worldwide movie chart, while also generating a decent Rotten Tomatoes critical score and a solid audience score. In contrast, The Bride is Maggie Gyllenhaal's reimagining of The Bride of Frankenstein, set in 1930s Chicago and pitched as a bold, feminist, revisionist creature feature with Jessie Buckley and Christian Bale. It opened theatrically to pretty weak box office numbers, around $13.5 million globally on an $80 to $90 million production budget, not including marketing. And it got some highly polarized reactions. Some critics admired it, said it was daring. Others thought it was indulgent, muddled, or tonally conflicted. So right away, the comparison is interesting. One film is simple, direct, designed to entertain, while the other is more stylized, more self-conscious, more important, and much more expensive. One knows exactly what shelf it belongs on, while the other seems to want to be 5 different things all at once. And that matters, because audiences can feel confusion, and they will reflect it right back. Now, this is where I think the real split begins. When someone clicks on War Machine, they know what they're buying. An established action star, sci-fi threat, military action, survival chaos, and a fast, visceral ride. And according to many reviews, that's basically what they get. Not some masterpiece, not high art, but a straightforward action thriller that delivers enough of the goods to satisfy the core audience. Even negative reviews tend to describe it as formulaic but watchable, or as Cineblend put it, big, dumb fun. Now that's important, because audiences are often very forgiving when a movie gives them what they actually came for. Now compare that with The Bride. What was the audience buying here? Was it a horror movie? A gothic romance? A feminist art film? A gangster fantasy? A monster movie? An awards season oddity? Or a revisionist studio spectacle? From the critical write-ups and box office analysis, that question seems to be part of the problem. See, even people who liked it described it as uneven or conflicted. And that's deadly when you're trying to sell a movie theatrically, especially at that budget level. The audience needs to know what kind of experience they're showing up for. Not every beat, not every twist, but the filmmaker-audience contract. And one movie honored that contract. The other didn't. And that leads to another huge difference between these two movies. Maybe the simplest one of all. War Machine knows exactly what it is. The Bride doesn't. And that matters more than people think, because one of the fastest ways to lose an audience is to confuse them about the kind of movie they're watching. Now, The Bride should have been a pretty easy sell. I mean, the pitch is right there. Frankenstein meets Bonnie and Clyde. That's clean, visual, marketable. And honestly, that sounds like a blast. Even the marketing and trailer leaned into that direction. Dangerous lovers, crime, chaos, style, monsters, old school myth with a pulpy twist. But once you get into the actual movie, it feels a lot more muddled than that. It's also trying to be art house, revisionist genre, feminist allegory, period piece that's also modern in its look, tone, and soundtrack, and maybe also a mythic romance thrown on top. And then also maybe a commentary on power, identity, and creation thrown on top of that. And none of those things are automatically bad. See, the problem is they don't always feel like they belong to the same movie. So what starts as a clear pitch becomes something much blurrier. And when a movie loses sight of its own identity, well, the audience feels that, because now the question becomes, what is this actually trying to be? And once the audience starts asking that instead of leaning into the story, you're in trouble. War Machine, on the other hand, doesn't seem interested in that confusion at all. It knows its lane, and it stays in its lane. And because of that, the audience can relax and enjoy the ride. Now, that doesn't mean War Machine is deeper. It means it's clearer. And these days, clarity is underrated. Too many filmmakers and critics and even film festivals push for subversion's sake, to the point where weird and quirky is often promoted over everything else. And that works on a small level, but not when every other film is doing it. Because if your movie is unsure of what it wants to be, then everything it is supposed to be starts getting pushed to the side. The core story loses oxygen. And once that happens, well, no amount of style, ambition, or messaging can fully make up for it. And that connects directly to the next thing we need to talk about: expectation and subversion. Because this is where people get lost. A lot of filmmakers here surprise the audience and think that that means to do the opposite of what the audience wants. But that's not the job. The job is give them what they came for, just in a better, sharper, and emotionally satisfying way than they expected. That's real subversion. Not betrayal, not confusion, not contempt. War Machine appears to understand this basic principle. It doesn't try to hide what it is. It doesn't apologize for being a men on a mission monster movie. It doesn't stop every 5 minutes to explain its own importance. It says, here's the setup, here's the pressure, here's the threat, here's the hero, and then it plays the game. That kind of clarity goes a long way, especially in streaming, where the audience decides in about 5 minutes flat whether to stay or bail. The Bride looks like it's the kind of film that wanted to subvert expectations, not just within the story, but around the idea of the movie itself. And to be fair, sometimes that works. But only if the new version's more compelling than the old promise. If you're selling a Frankenstein-adjacent theatrical film, well, audiences bring certain expectations, especially after the Guillermo del Toro version just came out. There's emotional tragedy, gothic atmosphere, monster mythology, horror or dark fantasy energy, some kind of accessible dramatic hook. If what they get instead is something more preachy, more ironic, more tonally slippery, less emotionally anchored, well, they might admire it from a distance, but that doesn't mean they're going to buy a ticket. That's the danger. Subversion only works when it creates deeper investment, not when it leaves people standing outside the movie trying to figure out why it exists in the first place. This is the part I always come back to. Story is character under pressure. Not messaging, not concept art, not look how different I am. Characters. Making choices. Taking action. Facing consequences. I think one reason War Machine works better than maybe it should is that it gives the audience a clear center. Alan Ritchson as a traditional action lead. Haunted enough to have dimension, physically convincing enough to carry the action. recognizable enough to make the marketing click. Reviews repeatedly point to his physicality and star persona as a key asset. Now, is that the deepest kind of character writing in the world? Probably not. But in this case, it's enough. And enough can be a huge advantage if the movie around it knows how to deliver. By contrast, The Bride seems to have a much more unstable center. Not because Jessie Buckley or Christian Bale aren't good at what they do, they are, but because the film around them appears split between tones, goals, and agendas. Critics who liked it praised its vision. Critics who didn't often called it self-indulgent or incoherent. And here's the thing. If audiences can't lock into the emotional spine of the story, well, then all the boldness in the world won't save it. Traditional storytelling still matters because it gives us a clear emotional map. Who do I care about? What do they want? What's in the way? What happens if they fail? How do they change? That framework isn't old-fashioned. It's human. Now let's bring in the money side, because story and budget are not separate conversations. The Bride reportedly cost around $80 to $90 million before marketing, and opened to about $13.5 million globally, which, let's face it, is brutal. At that scale, a movie has to pull in broad audiences, not just critics who appreciate ambition. When you spend that kind of money, you're making a promise. This film is for more than a niche. And if the movie is too stylized, too insiderish, or too confused to connect beyond a narrow slice of moviegoers, well, the math falls apart fast. War Machine, on the other hand, is a streaming film. Yes, the production budget is comparable, but the economics are totally different. It doesn't have to convince someone to leave the house and buy a ticket. It just has to win the click and then keep you watching. That's a much lower barrier. But it still has to satisfy the audience enough that word of mouth spreads. And it did generate that kind of attention, landing at #1 on Netflix's global movie chart and becoming a talking point online. So this is not just a story lesson. It's a story plus delivery lesson. If your movie is theatrical and expensive, well, clarity matters more. If your movie is streaming and genre-driven, momentum matters more. In both cases, the audience still matters the most. Now, this is the question I wish more filmmakers had asked earlier. Who is this for? Not in a cynical market research kind of way or an agenda-driven socio-political way, but in a storytelling way. Who is going to love this movie? War Machine seems to have a very clear answer. People who love fast, muscular, creature-heavy action thrillers with recognizable action stars. That audience exists. Netflix knows it exists. The movie was made for them. With The Bride, I'm honestly not sure the answer is as clear. Its defenders seem to admire it as a bold, auteur-driven swing for the fences. That's valid. But admiration is not the same thing as audience hunger. If the core audience for your film is mostly made up of people who like the idea of the movie more than the actual experience of watching it, well, then you've got a problem. And I think that's part of what happened here, because the theatrical audience is not showing up for homework or a lecture, and they're not showing up to applaud your intentions. They're showing up for an experience rooted in good storytelling. That's why messaging can't replace story. Theme matters. Perspective matters. Voice matters. But they have to live inside of a compelling story, not on top of it. And certainly not despite it. So what's the takeaway? Well, for me, it's this. The way forward is not less ambition. It's better storytelling, pure and simple. A return to traditional storytelling does not mean boring storytelling. It does not mean no surprises. It does not mean no voice, no edge, no experimentation, no risk. It means strong characters, clean emotional stakes, clear audience promise, satisfying escalation, and a payoff that feels earned. That's what lasts. That's what gets word of mouth going. That's what audiences come back for. And ironically, that's also what gives you the freedom to exceed expectations. Because once the audience trusts you, well, you can take them somewhere better than they imagined. That's the sweet spot. Meet expectations, then exceed them. Whatever you do, don't reject them just to prove that you're clever or better than the people you're trying to get. to watch your movie. So there you go. Two very different movies with very different release models, budgets, and goals. But I think they point to the same truth. Audiences still want good stories, not sermons, not brand extensions, not irony layered over confusion. Stories, character-driven, emotionally legible, well-paced stories that know who they're for. The sooner the industry faces up to that truth, the sooner it will go back to attracting the kinds of audiences it once did and making the kind of money it once did as well. Now I want to hear from you. Did you watch War Machine or The Bride? And which one do you think understood its audience better? I'd love to know your thoughts in the comments below. And if you're working on your own screenplay or feature and you want help making sure that your story connects, well, I offer all levels of service for all levels of writers, from screenplay coverage and 1-hour coaching calls to in-depth one-on-one story coaching and rewrites. We can work on structure, pacing, character, tone, or how to better align your story with audience expectations without losing your voice. You'll find the links below. So until next time, stay creative.